I knew something was wrong the second I turned the key in the lock. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. No television humming in the background. No footsteps upstairs. No clatter from the kitchen. Just a heavy, waiting silence. When I pushed the door open, Linda was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping near her ear. Kyle stood beside her, pacing back and forth, like a cornered animal, his phone gripped in his hand. They didn't even let me close the door. "What did you do?" Linda shouted, her voice cracking with fury. I almost fainted at the ATM. Kyle stepped forward, shoving his phone inches from my face. "The account's empty, Daniel. There's nothing in it." "What did you do?" I set my lunchbox down on the hallway table with deliberate calm. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "I got a new card," I said, "and I moved my paycheck to it." They both froze. The color drained from Linda's face so fast it was almost surreal, like watching ink disappear in water. Kyle's pacing stopped mid-step. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old wall clock I'd hung there 15 years ago. Then everything exploded. "You can't just do that," Kyle barked. "We have bills." "Our bills," Linda corrected sharply, but her eyes were locked on me, searching my face for weakness, for hesitation, for the man she thought she still controlled. I closed the door behind me. "No," I said quietly, "they're not our bills." The words hung in the air like smoke. 3 years earlier, I would have backed down. I would have apologized just to keep the peace. But something inside me had shifted the moment I walked out of the bank that morning. Something that had been buried under guilt and compromise had finally come up for air. 3 years ago, I married Linda because I believed in second chances. I was 52 then, already carrying the scars of a failed marriage and the loneliness that creeps in when your kids are grown and your house feels too large. Linda had warmth, or at least she did at first. She made me feel seen. Kyle came with the package. He was 24 at the time, between jobs, between apartments, between opportunities. Linda told me it would only be temporary. "Just until he gets back on his feet," she'd said, squeezing my hand across the dinner table. I'd believed her. At first it felt good to help. Family helps family, that's what my father used to say. I'd worked as a union electrician for over 30 years. Early mornings, long shifts climbing ladders until my knees protested and my back ached like rusted hinges. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. My paycheck came every 2 weeks like clockwork. The first time Kyle asked to borrow money, it was $200 for car repairs. "I'll pay you back Friday," he promised. Friday came and went. Then it was $300 for a phone bill, $400 for rent on an apartment he never moved into. Each time Linda would say, "He's trying, Daniel. Don't be so hard on him." I didn't want to be the villain. Then came the suggestion that changed everything. "It would just be easier," Linda had said one evening while I was rubbing ointment into my lower back, "if your paycheck went straight into our joint account. I handle the bills anyway. It'll simplify things." I remember hesitating. Something about it made my stomach tighten. But I was tired. Tired of arguing. Tired of feeling like the outsider in my own marriage. So I signed the papers. From that point on, my paycheck became a ghost. Every time I asked about our finances, Linda would wave a hand. "It's handled." If I noticed a large withdrawal, she'd say it was utilities. If Kyle had new shoes or another gaming console, it was a sale. When I pointed out the growing credit card balance, she'd remind me that I lived under her roof now too. Her roof. The first time I heard Kyle call it our house, something cold slid down my spine. This was the house I bought 10 years before I met Linda. The mortgage had my name on it, alone. I'd painted these walls. I'd replaced the roof after a hailstorm. Every board in the garage shelves had been cut and nailed by my own hands. But slowly, subtly, I'd been pushed to the edges of my own life. I cooked when Linda worked late. I drove Kyle to interviews that never turned into jobs. I kept quiet when the electric bill doubled and the cable package somehow included every sports channel known to man. And every 2 weeks, my paycheck disappeared. Last month was when the illusion cracked. I stopped at the pharmacy to pick up medication for my back. Nothing fancy, just something to help me sleep through the night. My card was declined. "Must be a glitch," Linda had said later too quickly. "I'll fix it." But I'd seen the bank notification pop up on Kyle's phone that same evening. A cash withdrawal at 2:17 a.m. Something inside me hardened. So I went to the bank. I asked for 18 months of statements. I sat in a stiff plastic chair and read every line, and what I found made the blood roar in my ears. Cash advances, sports bars, online betting sites, a beach vacation in Destin I was never invited to, electronic stores, jewelry. $38,700. Gone. When I asked Maya, the bank representative, if I could open a new account, one that only I controlled, she didn't look surprised. She just nodded and said, "Of course." Now I stood in my own living room facing the fallout. Kyle's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're going to ruin us, Daniel." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm just done funding you." Linda's hands trembled. "You had no right to do this without talking to me." I let out a slow breath. For 3 years, I said I didn't have a right to my own paycheck. Silence swallowed the room again. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of it. The silence in the living room didn't last long. It never does when money is involved. Kyle was the first to recover. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor I'd installed myself. "This is insane," he muttered. "You don't just change everything overnight." Linda's voice was softer, but it carried more weight. "Daniel," she said carefully, as if I were a fragile piece of glass. "We built a system. You can't just dismantle it because you're upset." Upset. The word almost made me laugh. "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm finished." Linda flinched at that. Not because I raised my voice, I didn't, but because there was no heat in it, just certainty. Kyle stopped pacing and pointed at me. "You live here too, you know. You eat the food. You use the lights. You think that stuff pays for itself." I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the faint stubble on his chin, the expensive smartwatch on his wrist, the shoes that cost more than the boots I'd worn for 10 years on job sites. "This house was paid for before you ever moved in," I said evenly. "The lights were on long before you knew the address." Linda stepped between us, her tone shifting. "Stop," she snapped at Kyle, then turned back to me. "This isn't about ownership, it's about partnership. Marriage means sharing. Marriage. The word used to mean something sacred to me. It used to mean trust." I walked past them and into the kitchen. I needed water. My throat felt dry, like I'd been breathing dust all day. They followed me. "Of course they did." "You blindsided us," Linda said, leaning against the counter. "If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me." I turned slowly, glass in hand. "I did talk to you," I said. "Every time I asked about the credit cards. Every time I asked why our savings kept shrinking. Every time I asked why Kyle was withdrawing cash at 2 a.m. Kyle's jaw tightened. "You were spying on me." "It's my account," I replied. Linda's face paled slightly at that word. My. For 3 years, that word had been replaced with ours. Our account, our expenses, our decisions. But the reality had always been simpler. My paycheck, my house, my name on the mortgage. The truth is, the transfer of control didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happens in small compromises that seem harmless at the time. The first compromise was the joint account. The second was letting Linda handle the bills. The third was trusting explanations that didn't quite add up. I remembered the night Kyle came home with that oversized television. 80 inches of unnecessary brightness dominating the living room wall. It was a clearance deal, he'd said. 2 weeks later, I saw the charge. $9,740,40 Then there was the vacation. Linda had told me she needed a break with Kyle. Just mother and son time, she'd said gently. "You've been working so much. You deserve rest too." I stayed home and worked overtime. They posted pictures from the beach. I saw the transaction later. Resort booking, rental car, restaurant charges. When I confronted Linda about it, she turned it around so smoothly it almost impressed me. "You make me feel like I'm stealing from you," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "Do you even trust me?" Back then, the guilt had been unbearable. Now the clarity was worse. Kyle slammed his palm against the kitchen table, jolting me back to the present. "So what now? You're just going to keep everything to yourself?" "Yes." The word came easier than I expected. Linda's eyes filled, but I'd learned to recognize the difference between hurt and panic. This was panic. "We have debt," she said. "You know that. Credit cards, medical bills, Kyle's car payment. You think those disappear just because you got a new card. I didn't create those debts." "We're family," she whispered. That word again. Family. I thought about my father working double shifts at the steel plant. About my mother stretching every dollar until it squealed. They never used that word as a weapon. Family meant protection, not extraction. I'm not abandoning you, I said quietly. I'm separating my income from your spending. Kyle scoffed. That's the same thing. No, I replied. It's accountability. The word hit harder than I intended. Kyle's eyes flickered. You think I don't want to work? He shot back. You think this is easy for me? I think I said slowly that for 3 years you've had access to money you didn't earn. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. Daniel, we were planning to tell you. Tell me what? That things got out of control. Out of control. As if it were weather. As if debt simply blew in like a storm. How much, I asked. Neither of them answered. How much, I repeated. Kyle looked at Linda. Linda looked at the floor. About 12,000, she finally admitted. I let the number settle. 12,000 in credit card debt, on top of the 38,000 already drained. And you thought the solution, I said slowly, was to keep using my paycheck. Linda's composure cracked. We thought you'd help us. I set the glass down carefully. I have been helping you, I said, for 3 years. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavier. Kyle's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at it, then quickly locked the screen. You don't understand, he muttered. Then help me understand, I said. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed his jacket from the chair and stormed toward the door. This isn't over, he said as he left. The door slammed. Linda stood there trembling. You're going to tear this family apart, she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not hatred, just exhaustion. This family was already cracked, I said. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. And as the front door echoed in the quiet house, I realized something else. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning of the reckoning. Kyle didn't come home until after midnight. I knew because I was still awake. I sat in the dark living room with only the small lamp by the recliner turned on the yellow light pooling around my boots. I hadn't turned the television on. I didn't want noise. I wanted to think. When the front door finally creaked open, I didn't move. Kyle stepped inside quietly, probably expecting the house to be asleep. He smelled faintly of beer and something sugary, cheap cologne layered over poor decisions. He froze when he saw me. You waiting up to lecture me? He asked, defensive before I'd even spoken. No, I said calmly. I'm waiting for you to tell me the truth. He shifted his weight. His eyes flicked toward the stairs where Linda's shadow lingered at the top landing. She'd been listening too. What truth? He muttered. I reached beside the recliner and lifted the folder I'd brought home from the bank. The edges were already bent from being opened and reopened all afternoon. This one. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Kyle stared at it like it might explode. What is that? 18 months of statements. He swallowed. Linda slowly descended the stairs. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. But her face had that tight, controlled look she wore when she knew something had slipped beyond her reach. You went through our finances, she asked softly. No, I corrected. I went through mine. I opened the folder and slid the top few pages toward Kyle. Go ahead, I said. Read them. He didn't sit. He didn't even bend. He just stared at the numbers from a distance like proximity alone would admit guilt. I don't have to justify every transaction to you, he said finally. You don't, I agreed. But when those transactions come out of my paycheck, I do. Linda stepped forward and picked up the pages instead. Her fingers trembled slightly. I watched her eyes move down the columns. Cash withdrawal, $400. Sports bar, $276. Online betting platform, $650. Electronics store, $1,198. Vacation rental, $2,045. Her breathing changed. You're making this look worse than it is, she whispered. Am I asked. Kyle grabbed the pages from her hands. You don't get it, he snapped. That betting stuff, I was trying to flip money, make more, help out. With whose money, I asked. He didn't answer. The thing about numbers is they don't shout. They don't exaggerate. They just sit there in black ink, patient and undeniable. $38,700. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a rough patch. That was a pattern. Linda sank onto the edge of the couch. We meant to tell you, she said, her voice thin. But every month we thought we could catch up. Catch up to what? Kyle paced again, but this time it wasn't anger driving him. It was fear. There were some losses, he admitted reluctantly. But if one bet had hit, just one big one, we could have wiped out the debt. I stared at him. You gambled my paycheck, I said quietly. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Linda shot him a look. I told you this would happen. Oh, now it's my fault, Kyle fired back. The argument ignited between them so quickly it almost felt rehearsed. You're the one who kept increasing the limit. You said we needed more breathing room. You said Daniel wouldn't notice. That last sentence hung in the air. They both realized what they'd said at the same time. My chest tightened, but not in the way it used to. Not with humiliation, not with shame. With clarity. So you knew, I said. Linda's head snapped toward me. That's not what I meant. You knew, I repeated. Silence. Kyle ran both hands through his hair. It wasn't personal. I almost laughed. It's very personal, I said. It's my work, my hours, my back. For 32 years, I'd climbed ladders in the heat and the cold. I'd crawled through attics with insulation sticking to my skin. I'd eaten lunch in a truck cab during snowstorms. I'd come home exhausted but proud that the lights stayed on because of me. And for 3 years, my effort had been treated like a subscription service. Linda stood slowly. What do you want us to say? The truth. Kyle exhaled sharply. Fine, we needed the money. I messed up. I thought I could fix it before you found out. You didn't fix it, I said. You doubled it. He looked down. And you, I said, turning to Linda. You watched. Her eyes filled, but this time I saw something else behind them. Calculation. We were trying to protect you, she said. From what? From stress, from worrying. You've had health issues. My health issues are because I've been carrying everyone else. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Linda looked genuinely shaken for a moment. Kyle broke the silence first. So what now? You think cutting off your paycheck solves this? It solves one thing, I said. It stops the bleeding. And the rest, Linda asked. The rest is yours. Kyle stared at me like I'd just announced a death sentence. You're going to let us drown. I'm not pushing you into the water, I replied. I'm stepping out of it. The house was so quiet again, I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. Linda folded her arms, retreating into defensiveness. You're acting like we robbed you. You did. The word felt heavy in the room. Kyle's eyes flashed. Be careful with that word. Why, I asked. Because it's accurate. He stepped toward me, jaw clenched. Linda grabbed his arm. Stop, she hissed. We stood there, the three of us locked in a standoff built on years of silence. Finally, I picked up the folder and closed it. Monday, I said, was the last time my paycheck funded this house. Linda swallowed. And after that, she asked. I looked around the room. The big television, the expensive speakers, the framed photos from vacations I hadn't taken. After that, I said quietly, we figure out who can actually afford to live here. Kyle's face went pale. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. And he had just lost his. The next morning felt like the aftermath of a storm. Not the kind with broken windows and downed trees, but the kind that leaves the air heavy, thick with everything that hasn't yet fallen. Linda didn't make coffee. Kyle didn't come downstairs. I brewed my own and sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the sunlight creeping across the floorboards. It struck me how long it had been since I'd sat there in silence without someone asking me for something. Around 10, Kyle finally emerged. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, jaw unshaven. He didn't greet me. He just poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. I called the bank, he muttered. I nodded. I figured you would. They said the deposit went through, just not to the old account. That's right. He looked at me like he was trying to see if I'd crack. I didn't. Linda joined us a few minutes later, dressed but pale. She avoided eye contact at first, then finally faced me. We need to talk like adults, she said. I've been ready. She sat down across from me. Kyle stayed standing, arms crossed, but listening. Okay, she began carefully. The situation is worse than we thought. I waited. The total debt, including the second card, is closer to $15,000. I didn't react, not outwardly. And I asked, and if we don't make the minimum payments this month, we'll default. I let that word hang there. You will default, I corrected. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. You're being cruel. No, I said evenly. I'm being accurate. Kyle pushed off the counter. You think this is funny? I think it's predictable. He stared at me. You're not perfect, he shot back. You've made bad calls too. Name one that cost you $15,000. Silence. Linda reached across the table. Daniel, please. We can work this out. You don't have to cut us off completely. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm separating finances. That's the same thing. No, I replied. It's boundaries. That word again. It seemed to make them both uncomfortable. Kyle started pacing the way he always did when he felt cornered. So what's your master plan? You keep your money, we magically fix ours. No magic, I said. Just responsibility. Linda's voice sharpened. You think we're irresponsible? I met her eyes. Yes. The truth landed between us like a dropped plate. She recoiled slightly. After everything we've been through. What we've been through, I said, is 3 years of you and Kyle spending money you didn't earn. Kyle scoffed. I've worked. Part-time, for 6 months. He didn't deny it. I leaned back in my chair. You have 30 days, I said calmly. Both of them froze. 30 days for what Linda asked. To decide. Decide what? If you want to stay here. Kyle's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. This is our home. No, I said quietly. It's mine. Linda stood up abruptly. How dare you? How dare I? What state of fact? You're threatening to throw your wife out. I'm offering terms. Kyle laughed bitterly. Terms? What is this, a business deal? Yes. That startled them both. If you stay, I continued, you'll pay $800 a month in rent. Combined. You'll cover your own food, your own utilities usage, and you will not have access to my accounts. Kyle's jaw dropped. Rent. You heard me. We're family, he shouted. Then act like it. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but they weren't the manipulative kind this time. They were raw. You'd charge your own wife. I'd expect my wife not to drain my paycheck in secret. That cut deep. She sank back into her chair. And if we can't, she whispered, then you find another place. Kyle exploded. You can't just kick us out. I'm not kicking you out, I said. I'm ending the subsidy. The difference mattered. They didn't like that it mattered. Linda looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger. Who are you? I'm the man who finally checked his bank statements. The room went silent again. I stood up slowly. You have 30 days, I repeated. I'll put it in writing. Kyle's fist clenched. You're going to regret this. I paused at the doorway. I regretted the last 3 years, I said. I'm done regretting. I walked out into the garage and shut the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there in the smell of motor oil and sawdust. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, from release. I'd spent 3 years swallowing frustration to avoid confrontation. Now it was out, and there was no taking it back. Behind the garage door, I could hear muffled arguing, Kyle's voice rising, Linda's breaking. I didn't intervene. I grabbed a scrap piece of wood from the workbench and began sanding it down slow, steady strokes. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over something again. And control, I realized, was the thing they'd feared losing the most. The first week after the ultimatum felt like living inside a pressure cooker. No one slammed doors anymore. No one shouted. Instead, everything was quiet in a way that felt rehearsed, polite, calculated. Linda stopped cooking. Kyle stopped speaking to me altogether. I didn't react. I went to work every morning at 6, came home around 4, and made my own dinner if nothing was on the stove. I bought groceries separately and labeled a shelf in the refrigerator with a piece of masking tape that said Daniel. It felt ridiculous the first time I did it, but it felt necessary. 3 days in, Kyle tried the first strategy. He caught me in the driveway while I was unloading a bag of cement from the truck. Look, he said, softer than usual. Maybe we started off on the wrong foot. I kept lifting. I don't think we started on the wrong foot, I replied. I think we walked too far in the wrong direction. He exhaled sharply. I've been applying for jobs. That's good. That's it? What do you want, a parade? His jaw tightened. You think this is easy for me? No, I said. I think it's overdue. He stared at me for a moment longer, then changed tactics. Linda's not sleeping, he said quietly. She's scared. I set the cement bag down and looked at him. Scared of what? Losing everything. I wiped the dust from my hands. She didn't seem scared when the resort charges came through. That ended the conversation. The second week brought the second strategy: guilt. Linda knocked on my bedroom door one night. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before opening it. She stood there without makeup, her face thinner somehow, like stress had carved away a layer. I've been thinking, she began, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I relied on you too much. Maybe," I said carefully. She reached for my hand. "We're married, Daniel. Marriage isn't supposed to be transactional." "It's not," I agreed, "but it's not supposed to be one-sided either." She looked down. "I didn't realize it got this bad." "You knew the numbers." "I didn't look at them like that." "How did you look at them?" "As survival." I studied her face. "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she tried something subtler. "What if we compromise?" she suggested. "You keep your paycheck, but you help with the credit cards. Just until we catch up." There it was. Not an apology. A negotiation. "No," I said simply. Her eyes flashed hurt, morphing into frustration. "You're being rigid." "I'm being consistent." She stood abruptly. "You're punishing us." "No," I said again. "I'm stopping." She left the room without another word. The third week brought anger. Kyle came home one evening, slammed the door, and threw his jacket onto the couch. "You're unbelievable," he said. "I was in the kitchen slicing vegetables." "What happened?" "They cut one of my cards." I didn't look up. "Consequences." "You did this," he snapped. "I didn't apply for it." He stepped closer. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "I think I'm tired." He laughed bitterly. "You're going to end up alone." That one hit. Not because I feared being alone, but because I'd already felt alone in a house full of people. "I've been alone for 3 years," I said quietly. He didn't know what to do with that. By week 4, the house felt different. Less hostile. More resigned. Boxes appeared in Kyle's room. I noticed the television was gone one afternoon. The oversized one he'd bought with clearance money. He sold it. Linda began coming home later from work. Avoiding me. Avoiding reality. On the 27th day, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a notepad filled with numbers. "We can't afford this house," she said flatly. "You couldn't afford it before," I replied. She didn't argue. "I found a small apartment," she added quietly. 2 bedrooms. It's not ideal." "No," I said. "It's realistic." Her eyes filled again, but there was something different in them this time. Acceptance. "You're really not going to change your mind?" she asked. "No." She nodded slowly. On the 30th day, Kyle loaded the last box into his car. He didn't look at me. Linda lingered in the doorway. "This didn't have to end like this," she said. "It didn't have to start like that either," I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I hope you're happy," she whispered. I thought about that for a moment. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm honest." She turned and walked to the car. I stood in the driveway as they pulled away. No screaming. No dramatic goodbye. Just the sound of tires on asphalt. And then silence. Real silence. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. Not because they were gone, but because I hadn't given myself a way to keep them there. The first night alone in the house felt unfamiliar. Not painful. Not triumphant. Just unfamiliar. I stood in the living room after the sun went down and listened to the quiet. No television blasting sports commentary. No muffled arguments behind closed doors. No footsteps pacing the hallway at midnight. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. I didn't realize how loud the house had been until it wasn't. I slept in my own bed without locking the bedroom door for the first time in years. That surprised me. I hadn't even consciously known I'd been doing that. The next morning, I made coffee and carried it out to the front porch. The early light filtered through the oak tree in the yard, casting moving shadows across the grass. The yard needed trimming. The roses along the fence were overgrown. I'd let things slide. Not just the finances. Everything. When you're busy holding a structure together, you don't always notice the foundation cracking. I spent that Saturday cleaning. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I rearranged the living room, took down the oversized wall mount where the television had been, patched the holes in the drywall. I opened windows and let fresh air in, even though it was still cool outside. By afternoon, the house felt lighter. By evening, I felt lighter. On Sunday, I drove to the hardware store and bought new light fixtures for the kitchen. The old ones had flickered for months, and every time I mentioned it, Linda said it wasn't a priority. Funny how priorities shift when the debit card stops working. I didn't hear from either of them that first week. Not a call. Not a text. I didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted. Then on the 8th day, my phone buzzed. Linda. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello. Her voice was softer than usual, smaller. Daniel, can we talk? We're talking. There was a pause. We moved in yesterday, she said. It's tight. I'm sure. Kyle's voice murmured in the background, too faint to make out. I've been thinking, she continued. Maybe we handled things badly. Maybe. She exhaled sharply. I'm not calling to argue. Then why are you calling? Silence. Finally, she said it. We're short on the security deposit. I closed my eyes briefly. How short? 2,000. I let that number sit. You said you weren't calling about money. I'm not, she said quickly. I'm asking for help. That's the same thing. Her breathing grew heavier. I thought, after everything, you might reconsider. Reconsider what? The hard line. I leaned back in my porch chair and looked out at the yard. There it was again. Not apology. Negotiation. I'm not your credit line, I said calmly. Her voice cracked. You're my husband. I replied, but you treated me like an ATM. The silence that followed was long. Then she whispered, so that's it. For now. She didn't argue this time. She didn't cry. She just said, I didn't think you'd actually follow through. I did. She hung up without another word. I sat there for a while after the call ended. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with choosing yourself. It doesn't look like sorrow. It looks like space, like standing in an empty room you used to share. Later that week, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Kyle. I almost deleted it without reading. Instead, I opened it. I get it now, he wrote. I screwed up. I thought I could fix it before it blew up. I was wrong. That surprised me. Then the second message came. Any chance you'd co-sign something for me, just until I get back on my feet? I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked the number. Not out of anger, out of clarity. On Friday evening, I found myself standing in the garage looking at the old fishing rods I hadn't touched in years. I used to go out to the lake every summer. I'd stopped. Because there was always a bill to discuss, always tension to manage, always someone else's crisis to solve. I loaded the rods into the truck the next morning and drove to the water. The lake was quiet. The air smelled clean. I cast the line out and sat back, feeling the slow rhythm of the world again. No one needed anything from me. No one was watching my bank balance. No one was calculating my paycheck before I even earned it. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't funding someone else's chaos. I was just breathing. And somewhere between the still water and the gentle pull of the current, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. Freedom doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. And steady I had finally become. 6 months passed before Linda knocked on my door. By then, the house no longer felt like an echo of what had been. It felt lived in again, intentional. I'd repainted the living room a warm gray, replaced the old curtains with simple white ones that let in the morning light. The garden was trimmed, the roses blooming the way they used to before everything got loud. I joined a Saturday morning coffee group at the hardware store, started fishing twice a month, fixed the small crack in the driveway that I'd been stepping over for years without addressing. It's funny what you notice when your life isn't consumed by someone else's urgency. When the knock came, I was sanding down a bookshelf in the garage. I knew it was her before I opened the door. There's a way someone knocks when they still believe they belong. Linda stood on the porch looking thinner than I remembered. No expensive handbag, no sharp makeup, just jeans, a worn sweater, and eyes that looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Hi, she said softly. Hi. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us sure what the correct distance was anymore. Can I come in, she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked slowly into the living room, looking around like she was visiting a house she used to know. You changed it, she murmured. I needed to. She nodded. We sat across from each other, the same couch where so many arguments had unraveled. Kyle wasn't with her. That's intentional, she said when she saw my glance. We're not together anymore. I waited. He left 2 months ago, she continued. The debt was worse than I thought. Gambling. Personal loans. I didn't know about half of it. I didn't say anything. Because I had known. Or at least I'd suspected. He used me the same way we used you, she said quietly. That word again. Used. The room felt smaller. I hit rock bottom, she admitted. And for the first time I understood what you meant. I studied her face carefully. There was no performance in it this time. No strategy. Just exhaustion. I'm not here to ask for money, she added quickly. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm paying down what I can. I nodded once. I'm here because I owe you something. What's that? She swallowed. An apology. The word hovered between us, fragile. I knew the numbers were bad, she said. I knew Kyle was spending recklessly. I let it happen because I was afraid. Afraid of confrontation, afraid of losing him, afraid of being alone again. She looked up at me. And I chose the easier path. I chose to keep using your paycheck instead of forcing him to face reality. I didn't interrupt. I justified it by telling myself we were married, that it was shared money, that you were strong enough to carry it. Her voice cracked. I didn't ask if you should. That landed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly on the wall. I can't undo it, she continued. I can't give you back the peace I stole, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I leaned back, taking in the weight of what she'd said. Apologies are complicated things. They don't erase. They don't refund. They don't rewind time. They simply acknowledge. I appreciate that, I said carefully. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I don't expect forgiveness today, she added. I just didn't want the last thing between us to be anger. I considered that. You understand? I said slowly, why I couldn't help you again. Yes. You understand why I couldn't compromise. Yes. You understand that boundaries aren't cruelty. She nodded. I do now. That was the closest thing to closure I'd heard in months. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about money, not about blame, just about life. Work. The small apartment she was renting. The reality of rebuilding at 52. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. You look lighter, she said quietly. I am. She smiled faintly. I hope you find someone who appreciates that. I didn't respond. Because appreciation wasn't what I'd been searching for. Self-respect was. After she left, I stood by the window and watched her walk down the driveway. Not with bitterness, not with longing. Just with understanding. Some relationships aren't meant to survive the truth. But some people can grow because of it. That evening, I sat on the porch again, coffee in hand, watching the sky fade into orange and violet. I thought about the man I had been 3 years ago. The one who avoided conflict. The one who equated sacrifice with love. The one who believed peace meant silence. He would have handed over the paycheck. He would have signed the cosign. He would have swallowed the resentment and called it compromise. But that man isn't sitting here anymore. This man learned something harder. That self-respect sometimes costs you comfort. That love without boundaries becomes exploitation. That saying no can be the most honest thing you ever say. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt guilty for protecting what you worked your whole life to build, your paycheck, your home, your peace, I want you to hear this clearly. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They're survival. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know whether Linda and I will ever be friends or simply 2 people who shared a lesson. But I know this. Today I live in my own house. Today I earn my own money. Today I don't apologize for existing. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to draw a line you were afraid to draw, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what line you had to draw in your own life. We share stories like this every day because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep walking this road together.